Today we're going to be talking about thrash metal, one of my favorite genres in all of heavy metal. Thrash, when the technical prowess of heavy metal formed a holy trinity with its best friends, power and speed, Motörhead led the way, predating the blistering tempos of not only punk rock, but also its ferocious offshoot hardcore. Then came Iron Maiden, Head, and Venom, all of whom helped define the sound and style of a genre that, against all odds, found massive worldwide success in bands like Metallica, Megadeath, Slayer, and Anthrax, also known as thrash metal's Big Four. From 1985 to 1991, the creative and mainstream success of the Big Four forever cemented the reps as metal gods, enabling each band to endlessly put out records and forever tour the world to bring thrash metal to the masses, quite literally in Metallica's case, as the band even played Antarctica for a one-off gig. But what about the numerous thrash metal bands that fill out the history of the genre in far greater numbers than four? As essential as the Big Four have been, it's impossible to understand the history of thrash in just four bands. So here's 10 thrash metal classics, in my opinion, to help you flesh out the genre that was, is, and always will be the glorious alignment of style, power, and speed. Now, these are in no particular order. I'm going from 10 to 1, but it is not from the least to the best. These are just 10 albums from different genres within thrash that I think paint a picture of the whole landscape that is thrash and speed metal. And we start with one of my favorites, number 10, Overkill: The Years of Decay, released back in '89. See, The Years of Decay is a widely considered Overkill's masterpiece, the culmination of everything they'd been building since their debut. Released at the tail end of thrash's peak, it blends the raw aggression of early Overkill with more ambitious songwriting and atmospheric touches. It's heavy and it's angry and surprisingly dynamic, and it firmly planted Overkill among the thrash elite. The production, handled by Terry Date, who would later actually work with Pantera and Soundgarden, gives the album a weightier, more modern edge. The guitar tone is thick, the drums punch hard, and Bobby Blitz's vocals are razor sharp, shrieking, sneering, totally unmistakable. There's a balance between speed and atmosphere here. Overkill's earlier work leaned more towards straight-ahead thrash, but The Years of Decay brings in slower, more doom-influenced passages and breakdowns, complex arrangements that show the band stretching themselves creatively. See, The Years of Decay is the last Overkill album featured Bobby Gustafsson, whose riffs and solos are a big reason for the album's power. His departure, it really marked the end of an era. Many fans see this as the peak of Overkill's classic period, and they're not wrong. So while Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and Anthrax often dominate the 80s thrash conversation, Overkill was the underground workhorse, consistent, fierce, never selling out, even when you approach an album like I Hear Black. But with The Years of Decay, it is proof that they belonged in the big leagues. This is Overkill at their most creative and most powerful. It thrashes and it grooves and it broods as everything that came before and the bands that would follow after. And it still holds up over 30 years later. At number 9, we have Satus with A Vision of Misery. We're going to delve a little bit into the 90s, 1992. By the time A Vision of Misery dropped, Satus had already built a reputation for pushing thrash to its outer limits. The first two albums, Illusions and Swallowed in Black, were fast and raw and packed with technical precision. But with A Vision of Misery, they reached a new level, incorporating death metal complexity, jazz-influenced progressions, and an almost overwhelming sense of speed and precision. This album is a technical onslaught, but it's never mechanical. It's angry and it's urgent, creatively unhinged in all the right ways. It represents that brief early 90s window when technical thrash and death metal collided at full speed. This could easily be on a death metal list, but I honestly consider this one of the premier thrash albums. And really, it's before the genre got pushed underground by, of course, grunge and groove. The playing here is insane. The riffs are razor sharp and constantly shifting. Drummer John Allen blasts through the tempo changes, off-kilter grooves, and stop-start chaos with total command. And of course, Stephen DiGiorgio, the unsung hero of extreme metal bass playing, steals the show. His fretless bass dances through every track with fluidity and aggression and intelligence, never just following the guitar. I mean, what an absolute beast Mr. DiGiorgio is. Now, vocally, Darren Travis delivers a harsh, raspy scream that leans more towards death metal than traditional thrash. His delivery is savage, but intelligible, intense without being guttural. The album doesn't go for catchy choruses or standard structures. Instead, it's a spiraling, unpredictable trip through misery, madness, and mental collapse, really honestly emulating the cover of the album that is an invitation to what you're about to hear. A Vision of Misery isn't political or fantasy based. It's deeply psychological, which some of my favorite thrash metal albums happen to be. It's filled with existential dread, paranoia, and inner torment. The lyrics mirror the music, fragmented, intense, and confronting. It's not just angry, it's disturbing. The production is raw but unbalanced. Guitars are sharp without being too polished and piercing. The drums hit hard, and the bass, which is unusual for thrash, is not only audible, but it's essential. It has its own voice. It's not glossy, but it's clear enough to appreciate the insane musicianship. Now, Vision of Misery was released at an awkward time, too extreme for mainstream thrash, but coming out before the rise of technical death metal. It got buried in the noise of the early 90s, but today is regarded as a classic. Satus influenced a generation of more extreme and progressive metal acts, and Steve DiGiorgio's bass work alone is enough to make this a required listen for musicians. In the current landscape, the album is viewed as a missing link between the technical thrash of the late 80s and the birth of full-blown progressive death metal that happened, honestly, in the late 80s, birthed into the early 90s. Of course, we see that with Human being, I think, the forefather of all that. It may have come early, may have come late, but it, to me, is the album of technical death metal that started everything. It's what got me into death metal, to be honest. I may have to do a list dedicated to that. So anyway, it's not easy listening, but for fans of complexity, speed, and intensity, it's one of the genre's most rewarding and forward-thinking albums. And we're tearing right into one of my favorite albums at number 8 from 1987, Exodus, Pleasures of the Flesh. Coming off the groundbreaking Bonded by Blood in 85, Exodus had a tough act to follow. That debut was raw, and it was fast and ferocious, a defining album of the Bay Area thrash. Pleasures of the Flesh arrived 2 years later under different circumstances. Most notably, original vocalist Paul Baloff was gone, replaced by Steve Zetro Sousa, formerly of Legacy, who eventually became Testament. Zetro's arrival changed the vocal dynamic, where Baloff was chaotic and used really kind of punch-tinge. Zetro had more control and a nasal snarl that became part of Exodus's signature sound going forward. This album marks that transition, and with it, the band also slowed down a bit, focusing more on groove and clarity without ditching aggression. Pleasures of the Flesh is still very much a thrash album, but it's a cleaner, more structured album than its predecessor. The production is thicker and more polished, though a little less raw. The riffs are front and center, delivered tight and palm-muted bursts with slower, stomping sections added for variety. Gary Holt and Rick Hunholt, the H-Team. Guitar work remains lethal, tight, fast, loaded with a menacing tone. Tom Hunting's drumming is aggressive and technical, and the rhythm section holds down mid-tempo crushers as well as the faster assaults. Pleasures of the Flesh was met with mixed reactions upon its release. Many fans were disappointed by the departure of Baloff and expected something more intense or raw like Bonded by Blood. In hindsight, though, the album holds up as a solid and essential piece of Exodus evolution. It shows the band tightening their sound and laying groundwork for the heavier and even more refined, in a lot of people's opinions, the 1989 masterpiece, Fabulous Disaster. Zetro's debut performance was divisive at first, but he proved he could carry the band, and his voice became the defining element of their classic run. Now, it may not hit the chaotic highs of Bonded by Blood, but is still very aggressive, riff-packed, and full of personality. Over time, Pleasures of the Flesh has earned more respect. A necessary and still very heavy chapter in Exodus' story. We move on to the Megadeath from the legendary Celtic Frost. All of the bands that make up the Big Four owe something to Celtic Frost. So do all the bands that would later embrace death, doom, progressive, and, of course, black metal. The Switzerland-based band were not only early progenitors of thrash, they also took the genre into uncharted territories, imbibing it with unbridled experimentation, plus a healthy dose of adventurous fun. Cue Celtic Frost take on Wall of Voodoo's new wave classic Mexican Radio for proof of that. But so long as ominous and foreboding sounds were on the menu, no stylistic detours or flourishes were off limits to Celtic Frost. That willingness to experiment coalesced in the best into the Megadeath. While early on, Celtic Frost were rough and ready to rumble, still holding on to their raw roots of their previous incarnation as Hellhammer, to Megadeath, the Frost were already combining their thrash sound with dark symphonic flourishes. There's an undeniable cinematic element to the album, something Metallica embraced with And Justice for All and the Black Album. Metallica would even go on to quote-unquote butcher the album's second track, The Usurper, or at least that's according to Celtic Frost frontman Thomas Gabriel Warrior, who told Rolling Stone in 2019, quote, "They butchered it, and it was humiliating. Why don't they leave their millionaire fingers off of it? They've long lost the ability to play true metal, in my opinion. Maybe I should go on stage and do a really miserable version of Hit the Lights with like 200 mistakes to set the balance." Fighting words, but to Megadeath is something of a sacred cow, not only among Celtic Frost, but with thrash fans in general. I don't know, was he fair? Who knows? At number 6, we have Coroner with 1989's No More Color. Speaking of Celtic Frost, here are their roadies. That's no kidding. The members of Coroner were all employed as Celtic Frost road crew, getting their start opening up gigs for Celtic. In fact, the band was so dedicated to their day jobs, Coroner didn't even properly tour as a band until 1989, 6 years after forming and after 2 full-length albums under their belt. No More Color is the band's third and some say best album. It grooves, it moves, and one listen is all it takes to understand Coroner's reputation as the Rush of thrash metal. There's an accessibility factor to Coroner's music that previous entries have lacked. These dudes stood at equal strength with the Big Four in all regards, especially in terms of Megadeth's instrumental precision, dig those cold, meticulous leads, and Slayer's corrosive vocal approach. No More Color is one of Thrash's best albums and by one of Thrash's best bands, period. At number 5, we move on to, again from 1989, another stalwart album, Beneath the Remains from the mighty Sepultura. 89 was such a watershed year for thrash metal that any best of list will always be heavy with albums barring that date. It was prime time for the genre before it peaked, and elements of its sound became watered down for radio play as the 90s took over. Brazil's Sepultura had no such designs on mainstream accessibility at this point in their career. With 1989's Beneath the Remains, their third full-length offering, still saw the band as raw as ever, but inching on the Bay Area melodic thrash made famous by Metallica and Megadeath. In my opinion, it's leaps and bounds above Schizophrenia that came before it. I mean, I don't know what happened, but they really ate their Wheaties for Beneath the Remains. Except Sepultura's vocals and rhythm guitars were way heavier, akin to Anthrax's penchant for rocking their grit in tandem with their groove. Frontman Max Cavalera's vocals are recorded deep and dry. He has a bark almost similar to the New York hardcore bands that were operating at the same time. Think Cro-Mags, Murphy's Law, Agnostic Front. And it really helped Sepultura stand apart. While the technical side of thrash in 1989 was definitely fist in the air, the purposeful groove-oriented offerings heard on Beneath are pure boots to the ground. It's a mosh pit classic, and you can see it evolving into what would follow, especially by the time you get to Roots. We go to number 4 with The Legacy. Testament's debut album. It's a strong contender for a position in the alternate dimension Big Five, where Testament crafted an instant classic in the aptly titled The Legacy. Lead guitarist Alex Skolnick imbibes the entire album with absolutely shredding solos that are as technically impressive as they are earwormingly catchy. This is the sound of Bay Area thrash. Testament made an album as good as Metallica or Megadeath's best, no question. The problem? They might have peaked too early. While 1988's The New Order and 1989's Practice What You Preach are strong, neither did much to expand what's already heard on their debut, so much as show the band polish their sound to lesser returns. And that's fine, but unlike the Big Four, who are all bested their debuts, it proved slightly less thrilling to be a Testament fan as time marched on. Still, The Legacy is an undisputed essential, as is The New Order for any thrash enthusiast, with the late album track and my personal favorite song off the album, Alone in the Dark, showing the type of growth that most bands take years to develop. Staying in the year 1987, we talk about the Ultraviolence from the young upstarts, Death Angel. The Ultraviolence is one of the most ferocious and accomplished thrash metal debuts of the 1980s, made more impressive by the fact that Death Angel were still teenagers when they recorded it. Hailing from the Bay Area scene alongside Exodus and Metallica, Testament, Death Angel brought youthful speed, technical flair, and a touch of experimentation that set them apart. The album is fast, aggressive, and occasionally wild, but it's also tight and incredibly well played for such a young band. It doesn't just show potential, it hits hard right out of the gate. This is pure, unfiltered Bay Area thrash, blistering speed, palm-muted riffs, and high-energy tempo shifts. But Death Angel also mixes in elements of melody and progressive structures. Songs aren't just riff fest, they're crafted with ambition. Rob Kefstani's guitar work is especially noteworthy. His solos shred, but they also have personality and phrasing that hint at a broader musical vision. And of course, Marco Suedo's vocals are raw but charismatic, shifting from snarl to scream with confidence. He doesn't sound like a clone of other frontmen. He sounds like a frontman. The production is gritty and it's rough. It sounds like a band in a garage throwing down hard, but yet that rawness adds to the album's energy. This isn't polished thrash. This is fast, it's youthful, it's urgent. The Ultraviolence just didn't make Death Angel superstars. It cemented their place in the thrash metal canon. It showed that this band, despite their youth, could hang with the veterans and really, in some cases, outplay them. It's a debut that still holds up to this day, both as a document of the Bay Area scene and as a timeless thrash album. Death Angel would go on to develop a more melodic and experimental sound, especially on Act 3, my personal favorite. But this album remains, which is why it's on here, their purest thrash attack. It is raw and it is full of ideas, and you don't just hear potential, you hear a band delivering on their first outing. We move on to 1991, Time Does Not Heal from Dark Angel. Time Does Not Heal is Dark Angel's magnum opus and one of the most complex, overwhelming thrash metal albums ever recorded. I remember seeing the advert at Warehouse Music advertised as 246 riffs. It listed the riffs and the time changes, and I just remember that 246. I was like, get out of here. The album is relentless. This is a cerebral assault, highly technical, lyrically intense, and uncompromising in every sense. It was released in 91, and as thrash wave was starting to recede, it was a really bold move. For many, a cult masterpiece, and while earlier albums like Darkness Descends were brutal and raw, Time Does Not Heal is calculated chaos, pushing the boundaries of what thrash could be, both musically and thematically. This is, if not the premiere, it's definitely set the bar for what we would know today as technical thrash in its purest form. There are no anthems, no radio hooks, just wave after wave of sharp, intricate riffs, time changes, and tightly arranged sections. Songs are long, between 6 and 9 minutes on average, and the pacing rarely lets up. Drummer Gene Hoglan is the star of the show. His performance is jaw-droppingly precise, anchoring the storm with total control. There's a reason why they refer to him as the nuclear clock. Guitarists Eric Meyer and Brett Erickson unleash a riff factory. Complex, angular, and rapid fire. There's a progressive edge to the structures, but the tone stays aggressive and it stays raw. Bass and vocals ride the chaos tightly, with Ron Reinhardt delivering commanding, emotionally driven vocals, more shouting than singing, but sharp and articulate. One of the most impressive aspects of Time Does Not Heal is its lyrical maturity. While a lot of thrash stuck to politics and war or horror, this album dives into psychological trauma, abuse, mental illness, and truly emotional pain. You can hear it in standout tracks like An Ancient Inherited Shame or Pain's Invention Madness or Active Contrition. Deal with introspective human themes with surprising depth. It's not preachy, it's just raw and it's wounded and it feels very real. The album sounds dense and organic, and it truly is. It's not overproduced, it's perfectly produced. The guitars are raw, the drums are massive, and the vocals sit right in the middle. It's a lot to take in, but that's the point. This is not background music, it demands your attention. Time Does Not Heal is a technical landmark in thrash metal, often cited alongside albums like Injustice for All and Death's individual thought patterns for its scope and ambition. But it's not for casual fans. It's long and it's intense and mentally exhausting in the best way. Unfortunately, it would be Dark Angel's final album for decades, as the band went on hiatus soon after. But what a note to go out on. For those who want complexity and real emotional weight in their metal, this album still holds up to this day, and it still challenges. Now, as I said at the beginning of this isn't a from least to best. This isn't the number one album I think is the best album, but there might be a reason I subconsciously put this at the top. And we are talking about 1990, Twisted Into Form, Forbidden. Twisted Into Form is a technical thrash masterpiece, tight, melodic, and emotionally charged, coming 2 years after the more aggressive and raw Forbidden Evil. This album shows Forbidden evolving into a far more progressive and refined outfit. It's a record full of detail, harmonized riffs, clean guitar interludes, sharp time shifts, and soaring vocals, all wrapped in a dark, introspective tone. This is thrash for deep listeners. It doesn't hit with blunt force like Slayer or Exodus, but it rewards repeat plays with nuance and musicality. Many fans and critics place it alongside Time Does Not Heal and Injustice for All as one of the genre's high watermarks for ambition and craft. Forbidden, they took a big leap in composition here. The guitars, especially with the addition of Tim Calvert, are intricate, weaving melodic phrasing into aggressive rhythms. Songs balance speed and control. You get head-banging riffs, but also moments of dynamic shift and even quiet tension. And of course, the vocalist, Russ Anderson, he's phenomenal. He ranges from clean operatic highs to aggressive shouts, always clear, always expressive. His delivery brings a theatrical, almost dramatic flair to the album's themes of betrayal, self-destruction, and collapse. Drummer Paul Bostaph, who would later actually end up in Slayer, delivers a technically tight, energetic performance that's creative, but it's never overdone. In my opinion, some of the track highlights would be like the bold opener, Infinite, is fast, complex riffing. Russ Anderson vocals are soaring over a driving tempo. Out of Body, Out of Mind, of course, is a classic, one of the most dynamic tracks, loaded with tempo changes and moody breaks, and honestly a killer chorus. Step by Step, their single, it's more straightforward but incredibly tight. It shows how Forbidden could write hooky thrash without simplifying their sound. The title track is mid-paced and brooding with clean sections of haunting melodies. And of course, One Foot in Hell is a fan favorite to this day, with lyrical weight and some of the album's most intricate solo work. Lyrically, Twisted Into Form trades in mental disintegration and existential dread and just straight up betrayal. There's no gore, there's no politics, just a deep dive into psychological collapse and inner conflict. The lyrics match the complexity of the music, adding emotional depth to precision riffing. The production, well, it is clear, it is very crisp, allowing all the details to breathe, especially important on a record with this many layers. The guitars are sharp, but they're warm, and the drums hit clean without dominating the mix. It's one of the best sounding thrash records of all time, in my opinion. Though it didn't break through commercially, Twisted Into Form is highly respected among thrash metal diehards and really musicians alike. It's a touchstone for progressive thrash, balancing technicality and melody and emotional depth without drifting into self-indulgence. It was also the last Forbidden album to feature this classic lineup, with Tim Calvert and Paul Bostaph would both move on, and the band's style would shift in the 90s, making Twisted into Form feel like a perfect, unrepeatable moment. Twisted isn't just heavy, it's thoughtful, dynamic, it's emotionally resonant, a must-hear for anyone into technical or progressive thrash. So anyway, that's my 10 albums, again in no particular order, but I am a big fan of all of those albums. And thanks for joining me on this little trip through thrash metal, and I'll see you in the next video. Later.